Hi everyone, welcome back to Midnight Crime Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's stories. Story 1. On a cold, rainy February morning in 2000, in the small community of Shelby, North Carolina, a little girl packed her backpack, left her family home in the middle of the night, and walked along a rural highway. What happened next has remained a mystery for over 2 decades, leaving her family, law enforcement, and an entire community searching for answers. Asha Shakila Degree was born on August 5, 1990, in Shelby, North Carolina, a close-knit community of about 20,000 people nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Shelby is the kind of small southern town where families have often lived for generations, where community ties run deep, and where in many ways life moves at its own gentle pace. Asha lived with her parents, Harold and Akila Degree, and her older brother O'Brien in a comfortable home on Oakcrest Street. The Degree family was well respected in their community. Harold and Akila both worked at local businesses, attended church regularly, and were known for their devotion to their children. The family structure was loving but disciplined, with clear expectations and routines. Those who knew Asha described her as a happy, intelligent child with a bright smile that could light up a room. She was a 4th grader at Falston Elementary School, where she was a good student who enjoyed reading and mathematics. Asha was also somewhat shy and reserved, especially around strangers, a trait that would later make her disappearance all the more perplexing. Asha played basketball at her school, wearing jersey number 44 with pride. Though her team had lost a game the weekend before her disappearance, those who knew her said she didn't seem unusually upset about it. She was a resilient child who generally took life's small disappointments in stride. The Degree household was carefully structured. Asha and O'Brien had consistent bedtimes, limited television privileges, and were not allowed to use the internet unsupervised. Fairly typical rules for children their age in the early 2000s. Friends and family emphasized that Harold and Akila were loving parents who maintained discipline and routine for their children's well-being. Asha shared a bedroom with her brother O'Brien, where she kept her prized possessions, her basketball uniform, favorite books, and a collection of family photos. She had a backpack decorated with characters from the television show Kids on the Block that she used for school. This ordinary backpack would later become a critical element in the investigation of her disappearance. In the days leading up to February 14, 2000, nothing in Asha's behavior suggested she was troubled or planning anything unusual. She attended school, participated in basketball practice, completed her homework, and followed her normal routines. The weekend before her disappearance included a family gathering at her grandmother's house, church attendance, and watching a basketball game on television with her family on Sunday evening. The normalcy of these activities has made what happened next all the more difficult to comprehend. There were no obvious warning signs, no clear indications of distress or dissatisfaction. Asha appeared to be a contented 9-year-old girl living within a stable and loving family structure. As with many families, the Degrees had their own special traditions and routines. Asha's mother Akila would often check on her children multiple times during the night, a habit born of maternal care that would later haunt her. Harold and Akila took pride in providing stability for their children, with consistent mealtimes, homework periods, and bedtime routines. Sunday, February 13, 2000, followed this familiar pattern. The family returned from church, had lunch, and spent the afternoon together. That evening they watched a basketball game on television. Asha and O'Brien completed their homework, had baths, laid out their clothes for school the next day, and went to bed at around 8:30 p.m. It was an ordinary Sunday evening in what appeared to be an ordinary American family. What no one could have known was that this ordinary Sunday would be the last day anyone would see Asha at home. The events that would unfold in the early hours of Monday, February 14th, Valentine's Day, would transform this ordinary family's life into an enduring mystery that continues to this day. In the early morning hours of Monday, February 14th, 2000, an unusual weather system was moving through Cleveland County, North Carolina. A cold rain was falling, and occasional wind gusts rattled windows and tree branches. The temperature hovered around 40 degrees Fahrenheit, about 4 degrees Celsius. cold and uncomfortable, especially for someone not dressed for such conditions. Inside the Degree home on Oakcrest Street, the family slept. Harold Degree had worked a night shift at PPG Industries, a fiberglass manufacturing company, and had arrived home around midnight. He checked on his children, as was his habit, before going to bed himself. Aquila was already asleep, having prepared for her early morning shift at a textile company called Kauai America Manufacturing. At approximately 2:30 a.m., the power in the neighborhood briefly went out due to the weather. Harold awoke and checked on the children again, confirming that both Asha and O'Brien were asleep in their beds. He then returned to sleep. Sometime between 2:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., 9-year-old Asha Degree did something that no one who knew her could have anticipated. She got out of bed, retrieved a backpack that she had packed with several sets of clothes, and left her home without waking her parents or brother. The doors were found locked from the inside the next morning, suggesting she may have left through a side door that could be pulled shut to lock automatically. What compelled a shy 9-year-old girl to leave her warm bed and venture out into a cold, rainy night remains one of the most perplexing aspects of this case. Was she meeting someone? Was she running away? Was she sleepwalking? These questions continue to haunt everyone involved in the investigation. At approximately 6:30 a.m., Aquila Degree awoke to prepare for work. She went to wake her children for school, as she did every weekday morning. When she entered their bedroom, she found O'Brien asleep, but Asha's bed empty. Initially thinking Asha might have gone to the bathroom or perhaps to her parents' bedroom, Aquila began looking for her daughter. Within minutes, it became clear that Asha was not in the house. Aquila woke Harold, and together they searched every room, looking in closets, under beds, and in any space where a 9-year-old might hide or fall asleep. They called relatives who lived nearby to see if, for some inexplicable reason, Asha might have gone to their home. The answer was always the same. No one had seen Asha. Panic began to set in. The Degrees contacted the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office at approximately 6:40 a.m. to report their daughter missing. Deputies arrived quickly and began a search of the home and surrounding area. An all-points bulletin was issued for Asha at 7:30 a.m., and by mid-morning, a full-scale search operation had been launched. As the day progressed, an astonishing piece of information emerged. Asha had not simply vanished from her bed. There were witnesses who had seen her. Between 3:45 a.m. and 4:15 a.m., 2 different truck drivers reported seeing a small girl walking along Highway 18, approximately 1 mile from the Degree home. They described her as wearing a white long-sleeved shirt and white pants. One driver said he saw her walking south, along the highway. The other driver, concerned about a child being out alone at that hour in bad weather, turned his truck around to check on her. When he approached, the girl ran off into the woods along the highway. Neither driver had a cell phone, still somewhat uncommon in early 2000, and both continued on their routes, only reporting what they had seen after news of Asha's disappearance was broadcast later that day. Law enforcement officials immediately focused their search efforts on the area of Highway 18 where Asha had been spotted. The implications of these sightings were staggering. Somehow, this 9-year-old girl had walked nearly a mile from her home, in darkness, during rainy and cold conditions, along the shoulder of a highway. For a child described as fearful of dogs and the dark, this behavior seemed completely out of character. Searchers combed the wooded areas along Highway 18, but found no immediate sign of Asha. Family members, friends, church members, and hundreds of community volunteers joined law enforcement in searching fields, woods, and abandoned buildings in the area. The FBI joined the investigation within days, bringing additional resources and expertise. 3 days after Asha's disappearance, on February 17, searchers found items belonging to her along the highway: a pencil, a marker, and a Mickey Mouse hairbow. These items were identified by her family as belonging to Asha, confirming that she had indeed been on that stretch of highway. The discovery of these items raised as many questions as it answered. If Asha had dropped these items while walking, why hadn't searchers found them sooner? Were they possibly placed there after initial searches? And most importantly, what had happened to Asha after she was last seen running into the woods? In the days and weeks following Asha's disappearance, the investigation expanded dramatically. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI worked together to pursue every possible lead. Hundreds of people were interviewed, including family members, friends, teachers, neighbors, and the truck drivers who had reported seeing Asha. Investigators thoroughly examined the degree home, finding no signs of forced entry or struggle. They confirmed that the doors had been locked from the inside and that there was no evidence suggesting Asha had been taken from the home against her will. The family's statements about their activities and routines were verified, and nothing indicated any family involvement in Asha's disappearance. Attention turned to understanding why Asha might have left home willingly in such condition. Investigators looked at her school life, searching for any signs of trouble or distress. They reviewed her schoolwork, spoke with her teachers and classmates, and examined her personal belongings for clues. Nothing indicated that Asha was unhappy at school or experiencing bullying or other problems that might have prompted her to run away. Her basketball coach noted that Asha had been upset after her team lost a game the weekend before her disappearance, but described her reaction as normal disappointment, not unusual distress. Friends and family consistently described Asha as a happy child who showed no signs of significant problems or unhappiness. A significant development came approximately 18 months after Asha's disappearance. In August 2001, construction workers found Asha's backpack buried along Highway 18 in Burke County, about 26 miles north of Shelby. The backpack was wrapped in plastic garbage bags, suggesting it had been deliberately preserved and hidden. Inside were several items of clothing and a book belonging to Asha. The discovery of the backpack raised troubling questions. How had it traveled 26 miles from where Asha was last seen? Why had someone wrapped it in plastic and buried it? The careful preservation suggested that whoever had buried the backpack wanted to protect its contents, possibly to prevent their degradation or to hide evidence. The location, along the same highway where Asha had last been seen walking, suggested a connection to her disappearance rather than a random finding. Investigators processed the backpack and its contents for fingerprints, DNA, and other forensic evidence. The results of these tests have not been publicly disclosed, but the discovery represented a significant piece of physical evidence in a case that had few tangible clues. As the investigation continued, authorities explored numerous theories about what might have happened to Asha. Was she abducted after being seen on Highway 18? Did she willingly get into someone's vehicle? Was she running away from something, or possibly to something or someone? Had she been groomed by an adult who arranged to meet her that night? Each theory had its supporters and detractors among investigators. One aspect of the case that investigators found particularly puzzling was the apparent planning involved in Asha's departure. She had packed her backpack with multiple changes of clothes, suggesting premeditation rather than an impulsive decision. Yet there was no evidence that she had communicated with anyone outside her family about plans to leave, and her family maintained that she had no access to unmonitored phone or internet use. In 2004, investigators released information about a possible vehicle of interest, a dark-colored 1970s model car, possibly a Lincoln Continental or Ford Thunderbird, that might have been seen on Highway 18 around the time of Asha's disappearance. This information came from re-interviews with witnesses who had been in the area that night. In 2015, 15 years after Asha's disappearance, investigators released additional information about items that might be connected to the case. They revealed that a Seuss book called McElligot's Pool and a white shirt with red lettering were of interest to the investigation. These items had not been in Asha's backpack when it was found, and investigators did not disclose how they knew these items might be connected to the case. In 2016, the FBI announced a new lead in the case. They reported that Asha might have been seen getting into a distinctive vehicle, described as a dark green early 1970s Lincoln Mark IV or Ford Thunderbird with rust around the wheel wells of her disappearance. This information came from a re-examination of witness statements and new interviews conducted as part of the ongoing investigation. Throughout the investigation, Asha's parents, Harold and Aquila Degree, remained steadfast in their determination to find their daughter. They maintained a consistent presence in the media, keeping Asha's case in the public eye and cooperating fully with investigators. They have never wavered in their belief that Asha will be found someday. As months turned into years, and years into decades, the search for Asha Degree never truly ended. Each year on February 14, the anniversary of her disappearance, her family, friends, and community members gather for a walk along the stretch of Highway 18 where she was last seen. This annual event serves both as a memorial and as a reminder that Asha is still missing, still being searched for, still being remembered. The impact of Asha's disappearance on the Shelby community has been profound and enduring. In a small town where many families had lived for generations, where children often played freely outdoors without fear, Asha's case shattered a sense of security and innocence. Parents became more protective of their children, more vigilant about knowing their whereabouts, more conscious of the potential dangers that might lurk even in familiar surroundings. For Asha's immediate family, the pain of her absence has never diminished. Harold and Aquila Degree have spoken publicly about the daily struggle of not knowing what happened to their daughter. In interviews over the years, they have described the challenge of continuing to live and work while carrying the weight of such uncertainty. They have remained in the same house on Oak Crest Street, hoping that if Asha ever finds her way home, she will know where to find them. Asha's brother O'Brien, who was 10 years old when his sister disappeared, has grown up in the shadow of this family tragedy. As an adult, he has participated in the annual walks and other events to keep Asha's memory alive. The impact of losing a sibling under such mysterious circumstances is difficult to quantify, but it has undoubtedly shaped his life in profound ways. In 2008, the community raised funds to erect a billboard along Highway 18 with Asha's picture and information about her case. This billboard, which has been maintained and updated over the years, serves as a constant reminder that Asha is still missing, and that someone somewhere might have information that could help solve the case. Law enforcement agencies have never classified Asha's case as cold, despite the passage of time. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and the FBI continue to follow up on tips and leads as they come in. Periodically, they conduct new searches of areas of interest, often based on information developed through re-examination of existing evidence or new witness statements. In 2017, one such search took place in an area near where Asha's backpack had been found. FBI agents, along with state and local law enforcement, conducted an extensive search of a property but did not publicly disclose what prompted the search or what, if anything, was found. The continuing allocation of resources to these search efforts underscores the commitment of law enforcement to solving this case. Over the years, Asha's case has received national attention through television programs like America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and various true crime documentary series. These programs have generated new tips and leads, each of which has been investigated, though none has yet led to a resolution of the case. In 2015, the FBI announced a $25,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons responsible for Asha's disappearance. This reward, combined with $20,000 offered by the sheriff's office and private donors, brought the total reward to. The substantial reward reflects both the seriousness with which authorities continue to view this case and their belief that someone has information that could help solve it. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has worked with forensic artists to create age-progressed images of what Asha might look like as she grew older. These images have been widely distributed in hopes that someone might recognize her, though there have been no confirmed sightings of Asha since the morning she disappeared. As we come to the end of this case, let's reflect on the case of Asha Degree, not just as a mystery to be solved, but as the story of a child whose life continues to matter deeply to those who knew and loved her, and to a community that has never stopped searching for answers. The disappearance of Asha Degree stands as one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in recent history. The circumstances, a shy 9-year-old girl leaving her home in the middle of a cold, rainy night and walking along a highway, seem to defy logical explanation. The lack of a clear motive, the absence of any communication about her plans, and the limited physical evidence have all contributed to the enduring mystery of what happened to Asha. Yet amidst the mystery, there are also elements of hope and resilience. Hope found in the dedication of investigators who continue to pursue leads more than 2 decades later. Hope in the unwavering belief of Asha's parents that one day they will find answers. Hope in the support of a community that has never forgotten one of its youngest members. The resilience of the Degree family stands as a testament to the enduring power of love and faith in the face of profound loss. Harold and Aquila Degree have transformed their personal tragedy into a mission to keep Asha's memory alive and to ensure that other families do not experience similar pain. They have spoken at community events, worked with organizations focused on missing children, and maintained a public presence that has kept Asha's case in the public consciousness. As investigators continue to work on Asha's case, they remain hopeful that advances in forensic technology, particularly in DNA analysis, may someday provide new insight. They also believe that someone somewhere has information that could help solve this case. Perhaps someone who has carried this knowledge as a burden for many years and might now be ready to come forward. For those of us who never knew Asha personally, her story serves as a powerful reminder of the vulnerability of children and the responsibility we all share to protect them. It reminds us of the importance of community vigilance, of paying attention to the children in our neighborhoods and schools, and of speaking up when something doesn't seem right. If you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our next story. Story 2. In January 2013, a 21-year-old Canadian student named Elisa Lam arrived in Los Angeles, California. She was on what many young people would consider an adventure of a lifetime. Traveling alone down the West Coast, visiting cities like San Diego, Los Angeles, and eventually planning to reach Santa Cruz. She documented her journey on social media, sharing her experiences and observations with friends and family back home in Vancouver. What began as an exciting solo journey would transform into one of the most puzzling and discussed mysteries of the modern era. Within weeks of her arrival in Los Angeles, Elisa would vanish from the historic Cecil Hotel in downtown LA, only to be discovered under the most unusual and troubling circumstances. Circumstances that would generate theories ranging from the tragic but explainable to the wildly supernatural. Elisa Lam was born on April 30, 1991. To parents who had emigrated from Hong Kong to Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Growing up in Vancouver's suburbs, Elisa was described by those who knew her as intelligent, creative, and insightful. Someone with a keen mind and a thoughtful perspective on the world around her. At the time of her journey to California, Elisa was a student at the University of British Columbia studying art history. Friends and classmates remember her as somewhat introverted but warm once you got to know her. Someone who observed the world carefully and often expressed herself through writing and photography. Her Tumblr blog, which would later become a source of intense scrutiny, revealed a young woman with varied interests in literature, fashion, and arts, along with the common uncertainties and self-exploration that many experience in their early 20s. What many didn't know during her life, but would learn after her death, was that Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had been prescribed several medications to help manage her condition. Like many young adults with mental health challenges, she was working to find balance, to pursue her dreams and live independently while managing the complexities of her health. Her parents later shared that she had been responsible about taking her medication and had regular contact with mental health professionals. In January 2013, Elisa embarked on what she called her West Coast tour. She planned to visit San Diego, Los Angeles, Santa Cruz, and San Francisco, traveling alone by bus and staying in budget accommodations. For many young people, such solo travel represents an important rite of passage, a chance to experience independence and self-reliance. Elisa documented the early parts of her journey on social media, posting photos and observations about the places she visited. She began her trip in San Diego, where everything seemed to go as planned. She visited tourist attractions, explored the city, and shared her experiences online. After San Diego, she made her way to Los Angeles, arriving in late January 20. She checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles on January 26th, initially booking a shared room in the hotel's hostel section called the Stay on Main. The choice of the Cecil Hotel would later be scrutinized intensely, as the establishment had a troubled history that Elisa may not have been fully aware of. Built in the 1920s during an economic boom, the Cecil had once been a luxurious destination, but had fallen into decline over the decade. By 2013, it had become known for its affordability but also for its location in a challenging area of downtown Los Angeles, the area known as Skid Row, which had significant populations of unhoused individuals and struggled with crime issues. The Cecil also had a dark history that had earned it a particular reputation in Los Angeles. Over the decades, it had been the scene of several suicides, murders, and had even housed infamous serial killers like Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker. In an attempt to distance itself from this troubled past, parts of the hotel had been rebranded as Stay on Main, to appeal to budget travelers like Elisa, though it remained the same building with the same history. Whether Elisa knew of this history is unclear. As a budget traveler in the days before extensive online reviews were common, she may have simply chosen the hotel for its central location and affordable rates. What we do know is that shortly after checking in, Elisa's behavior reportedly began to draw attention. According to later reports from hotel staff, Elisa was initially placed in a shared hostel-style room, but was moved to a private room after her roommates complained about some unusual behavior. The exact nature of this behavior was never publicly detailed, but it suggested that something may have been amiss with Elisa early in her stay. During her time in Los Angeles, Elisa visited several tourist destinations. She was known to have taken a tour of the Warner Bros. Studio in Burbank on January 31st, and she also visited a bookstore called The Last Bookstore, which she mentioned on social media. These normal tourist activities suggest that at least some of her time in Los Angeles proceeded as planned, the ordinary adventures of a young traveler exploring a new city. Back in Vancouver, Elisa's family had an arrangement with her. She would call them every day to check in, understanding the natural concerns parents might have for a daughter traveling alone. According to her parents, this daily communication was consistent until January. When they didn't hear from her on February 1st, they became concerned, as this break in routine was out of character for their reliable daughter. When Elisa failed to contact her family on February 1st, 2013, her parents immediately grew concerned. The daily check-ins had been established specifically to ensure her safety while traveling alone, and Elisa had been diligent about maintaining this communication. Her silence was immediately recognized as unusual. On February 1st, Elisa was scheduled to check out of the Cecil Hotel and continue her journey to Santa Cruz. When she neither checked out as planned nor contacted her family, her parents reported her missing to the Los Angeles Police Department. Being from another country and unfamiliar with Los Angeles, they felt helpless as they tried to coordinate search efforts from Vancouver. The LAPD began their investigation by visiting the Cecil Hotel. They interviewed staff members, who confirmed that Elisa had not checked out as scheduled, and that her belongings were still in her room. This included her laptop, clothing, identification, and other personal items, suggesting that whatever had happened, she had not planned to leave the hotel permanently without her possession. Police began searching the hotel, including common areas, the roof, and eventually with the aid of search dogs. They distributed flyers with Elisa's photo throughout downtown Los Angeles, and reached out to the public for information. Surveillance footage from businesses near the hotel was reviewed, though it's unclear if any sightings of Elisa were found outside the hotel. On February 6th, nearly a week after Elisa was last heard from, the LAPD held a press conference about her disappearance, and released the last known images of her. Surveillance footage from inside the Cecil Hotel that would soon become famous worldwide for its disturbing and perplexing nature. The surveillance video taken from an elevator security camera on January 31st showed Elisa behaving in ways that many found deeply unsettling. In the roughly 4-minute video, she enters the elevator and presses multiple buttons. The doors fail to close, and what follows is a series of bizarre movements and gestures that have been endlessly analyzed and debated. In the footage, Elisa steps out of the elevator, appears to hide or press herself against the wall, then re-enters. She makes unusual hand gestures, moving her hands in ways that some have described as communicating with an unseen person, while others have suggested they resemble the finger movements of someone experiencing certain types of mental health episodes. At times, she steps out of the elevator again, waving her arms before returning. Throughout this sequence, the elevator doors remain open despite her having pressed multiple buttons. Finally, Elisa exits the elevator and appears to walk away down the hallway, after which the elevator doors finally close. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Elisa Lam alive. The release of this video generated enormous public interest in the case. Many viewers found the footage deeply unsettling, and it quickly spread across the internet, spawning countless theories and analyses. Some suggested Elisa appeared to be hiding from someone, while others thought she might be playing a game. Mental health experts noted that her movements could be consistent with certain types of psychiatric episodes, particularly given her known bipolar diagnosis. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Elisa, the investigation continued. Police searched throughout the hotel multiple times, including areas not accessible to guests. They interviewed other hotel residents and staff. Elisa's parents traveled to Los Angeles to appeal for information, holding their own press conference on February 12th, where they described their daughter and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. Throughout this period, hotel guests continued their stays, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding around them. Some would later report strange occurrences during their stays in mid-February. Unusual noises, problems with water pressure, and water that sometimes ran dark or had an odd taste. These complaints would take on a much more disturbing significance in light of what was to come. On February 19, 2013, nearly 3 weeks after Elisa was last seen, maintenance workers at the Cecil Hotel made a shocking discovery that would provide answers but also raise many more questions. Responding to guest complaints about water problems, a worker went to check the hotel's water tanks on the roof. The Cecil Hotel had 4 large water tanks on its roof, each holding up to 1,000 gallons of water that supplied the building. Upon checking these tanks, the worker made the horrifying discovery of Elisa's body floating inside one of them. Her clothes, the same clothes she had been wearing in the elevator video, were floating nearby, separate from her body. Her room key and watch were also found in the tank. This discovery explained the water problems guests had been experiencing. They had unknowingly been using water from the tank containing Elisa's body for drinking, bathing, and brushing their teeth. For many guests, this realization would be deeply traumatizing. The discovery of Elisa's body raised immediate and troubling questions. How had she accessed the roof, which was supposedly secured and alarmed? How had she managed to open the heavy water tank lid, climb inside, and then presumably close it behind her? And perhaps most perplexingly, why would she have done so? Following the discovery of Elisa Lam's body, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office conducted an autopsy to determine the cause of death. On February 21, 2013, the initial autopsy was completed, but the coroner deferred the cause of death pending further tests, including toxicology screening. The investigation now focused on several key questions. How did Elisa access the hotel roof? How did she get into the water tank? Did she act alone, or was someone else involved? Was her death an accident, suicide, or something more sinister? Police investigators carefully examined the route to the roof. According to the hotel's security measures, the door to the roof should have been locked and connected to an alarm that would sound if opened. Additionally, accessing the water tanks themselves presented challenges. They were large cylindrical containers with heavy lids that would be difficult to move, standing on a platform several feet above the roof surface. However, subsequent investigation revealed troubling gaps in the hotel's security. Reporters who visited the hotel after Elisa's body was found discovered that some of the doors to the roof were occasionally propped open or left unlocked, and the alarm system was not always functioning properly. Former hotel employees later stated that guests sometimes accessed the roof to smoke or take in views of the city, despite rules prohibiting this. Investigators also reviewed additional surveillance footage and conducted extensive interviews with hotel staff and guests. They were particularly interested in determining if Elisa had been alone during the time period captured in the elevator video, and whether anyone else had accessed the roof around the same time. On April 19, 2013, nearly 2 months after discovering Elisa's body, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office released their findings. They ruled her death an accidental drowning, with bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing condition. The toxicology report found traces of her prescribed medications, Wellbutrin, Lamictal, Seroquel, and Effexor, but at levels suggesting she might not have been taking her full dosage in the days before her death. No alcohol or recreational drugs were found in her system. The coroner's report suggested that Elisa's bipolar disorder had played a role in her behavior and ultimate death. They theorized that she may have experienced a manic episode that led to the unusual behavior seen in the elevator video, and her eventual access to the roof and water tank. The report noted that bipolar disorder can sometimes involve behaviors such as disrobing, explaining her clothes being found separate from her body, and seeking unusual hiding places during episodes. This official explanation did little to quell public fascination and skepticism about the case. Many questions remained unanswered, or inadequately addressed in the minds of observers. How had she managed to open, enter, and then close the heavy tank lid behind her if she was experiencing a mental health crisis? Why hadn't the hotel's security measures prevented access to such a dangerous area? And what explained some of the more unusual aspects of the elevator video? In September 2013, Elisa's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Cecil Hotel, arguing that the establishment had failed in its duty to make the premises safe and secure for their guests. The lawsuit specifically mentioned the hotel's location in a high-crime area and its history of attracting transients and criminals, suggesting that the hotel should have taken additional security measures. The hotel's defense argued that they could not have reasonably foreseen that someone would access the water tanks, and that they had no legal duty to protect Elisa from the unforeseeable act of entering a water tank on the roof. In 2015, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge dismissed the lawsuit, siding with the hotel's argument that they could not have anticipated such an unusual event. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Public interest in the case continued to grow. The unusual circumstances, combined with the disturbing elevator video, made Elisa's story the subject of intense online discussion. Amateur detectives combed through every detail of the case, proposing alternative theories ranging from murder conspiracies to supernatural explanation. Adding to the eerie nature of the case were several coincidences that internet sleuths quickly identified. Perhaps most notably, many pointed out similarities between Elisa's case and the 2005 horror film Dark Water, in which a young woman's body is found in a hotel's water tank, affecting the water quality. Others noted that around the time of Elisa's death, there was a tuberculosis outbreak on Skid Row near the hotel, and a test for tuberculosis happens to be called the Lam Elisa test, a striking coincidence using the letters of her name. These coincidences, while almost certainly nothing more than that, added to the mystique surrounding the case and fueled further speculation. The case became a magnet for conspiracy theories and supernatural explanations, despite the medical examiner's straightforward inclusion of accidental drowning complicated by mental illness. In the years following Elisa Lam's tragic death, her story has continued to resonate with people around the world. What might have been a sad but relatively straightforward case of accidental death, complicated by mental illness, instead became one of the most discussed and analyzed mysteries of the internet age. The haunting elevator video alone has been viewed millions of times, with new analyses and theories continuing to emerge years after her passing. The Cecil Hotel itself, already infamous before Elisa's death, saw its dark reputation further cemented by this tragedy. In 2017, the Los Angeles City Council designated the building a historic cultural monument, acknowledging its significance in the city's history despite, or perhaps partly because of its troubled past. Later that same year, the hotel closed for extensive renovations, with plans to reopen as a mix of hotel rooms and residential units, though these plans have faced various delays. Elisa's death also sparked important conversations about mental health, particularly bipolar disorder. Mental health advocates have used her story to highlight the challenges faced by those living with serious mental health conditions, especially when traveling alone or navigating unfamiliar environments without support systems in place. In February 2021, Netflix released a 4-part documentary series titled Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel, directed by Joe Berlinger. The series examined Elisa's case in detail, featuring interviews with hotel employees, law enforcement officials, journalists, and mental health experts. While the documentary ultimately supported the coroner's conclusion of accidental death, it also explored the online obsession with the case and how internet sleuths sometimes pursued misguided theories that harmed innocent people. One such person was Mexican death metal musician Pablo Vergara, who performed under the name Mort because he had stayed at the Cecil Hotel in the past, though not during Elisa's stay, and had posted dark creative content online. Internet detectives falsely accused him of involvement in Elisa's death. He received death threats and experienced a mental health crisis as a result of these unfounded accusations. His experience highlighted the real-world consequences that can result from amateur online investigation. The documentary also addressed the troubled history of the Cecil Hotel and its surroundings, placing Elisa's story in the context of the challenging social conditions of Los Angeles' Skid Row area. It examined how decades of social policy decisions had concentrated poverty, mental illness, and addiction in the neighborhood where the Cecil stands, creating conditions where tragedies of various kinds became more likely. For many who have followed this case closely, the official explanation of accidental drowning during a bipolar episode remains unsatisfying. They point to various details that seem difficult to reconcile with this conclusion: the closed tank lid, the difficulty of accessing the roof, the precisely timed elevator malfunction during her strange behavior, and more. However, mental health experts have noted that during manic episodes, individuals can demonstrate unusual strength, fearlessness, and determination that might explain these seemingly impossible actions. What's often lost in discussions of the mystery surrounding Elisa's death is the very real tragedy of a young life cut short. Elisa Lam was not merely an internet mystery or a subject for amateur detectives. She was a daughter, friend, student, and young woman, with hopes, dreams, and a future ahead of her. Her parents have largely maintained their privacy following the legal proceedings, choosing to grieve their daughter away from the public fascination with her final days. Elisa's Tumblr blog, which she titled Aetherfields, continued to post content automatically for months after her death, due to scheduled posts she had set up in advance. This digital afterlife created an eerie situation where her thoughts and selected content continued to appear online long after she was gone, providing glimpses into her interests and perspectives, while simultaneously reminding readers of her absence. In one of her final Tumblr posts before her death, Elisa quoted Chuck Palahniuk, "The tragedy is not that things are broken. The tragedy is that things are not mended again." These words take on a poignant significance in light of what would happen to her, a young life that would not have the chance to be mended or to realize its full potential. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration of Elisa Lam's story, it's worth reflecting on why this particular case has captured public imagination so powerfully and persistently. Perhaps it's the visual nature of the evidence, that haunting elevator video that allows viewers to see Elisa's final documented moments and form their own interpretations. Perhaps it's the setting of the Cecil Hotel with its long history of tragedy and darkness, or perhaps it's simply the fundamental human desire to make sense of the seemingly senseless, to find patterns and meaning in events that resist easy explanation. While we may never know with absolute certainty what transpired during Elisa's final hours, the most compassionate approach to her story is one that recognizes the real challenges faced by those living with serious mental health conditions. Bipolar disorder, when not properly managed with medication and support, can indeed lead individuals to perceive reality differently and engage in behaviors that might seem inexplicable to others. The Los Angeles County Coroner's assessment that Elisa experienced a manic episode that led to her accidental drowning is supported by medical evidence, including the subtherapeutic levels of her prescribed medications found in her system. Mental health experts who have reviewed the case have noted that her behavior in the elevator video shows several characteristics consistent with certain types of psychiatric episodes. What remains undeniable is the tragedy of a young life lost, a daughter, sister, friend, and student, with her own unique perspectives and contributions to offer the world. Behind the mystery that has fascinated internet sleuths was a real person navigating the challenges of young adulthood while managing a serious mental health condition and traveling alone in an unfamiliar city. Perhaps the most meaningful legacy of Elisa's story would be increased awareness and understanding of mental health issues, particularly the importance of support systems for those traveling while managing such conditions. Her case has prompted some hotels to review their security measures and has highlighted the need for compassionate approaches to mental health crises. For those who continue to be fascinated by unsolved aspects of this case, it's worth remembering that sometimes the most straightforward explanation, even if it doesn't address every question, may indeed be the correct one. The human mind often seeks elaborate or conspiracy-laden explanations when faced with troubling events, sometimes overlooking the simpler realities of human vulnerability and institutional failure. If you're still awake and listening to my voice, and if you or someone you know struggles with mental health challenges, please remember that resources are available. Organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness offer support, education, and advocacy for individuals and families affected by mental illness. As we conclude on this case, let the gentle sound of rainfall carry you toward peaceful sleep. May Elisa Lam be remembered not just for the mysterious circumstances of her death, but for the unique individual she was during her life, a young woman with her own voice, perspective, and story that extended far beyond her final days at the Cecil Hotel. If you're still awake and listening, please don't forget to comment where you're listening from and the current time in your corner of the world. Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss our daily true crime stories for sleep. Now let's move on to our next story. Story 3. Keddie, California sits nestled in Plumas County, about 85 miles northwest of Reno, Nevada. In the early 1900s, it was established as a railroad stop, named after railroad man Arthur W. Keddie. By the 1930s, it had transformed into a resort destination, with a beautiful lodge and surrounding cabins that attracted vacationers seeking escape in the mountains. But by 1981, the year our story takes place, the Keddie Resort had fallen into disrepair. The once pristine cabins had become rentals, mostly occupied by working-class families and individuals drawn by the affordable prices and natural beauty of the Feather River Canyon. The small community numbered fewer than 200 residents, many of whom knew each other well, the kind of place where neighbors borrowed sugar and kept an eye on each other's children. Cabin 28 was a modest structure, with 3 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. It sat among the pine trees, not far from the main lodge, with a small front porch facing the dirt road that wound through the resort grounds. By April 1981, it was home to 36-year-old Glenna Sue Sharp and her 5 children. Sue Sharp had moved to Keddie just months earlier, in November 1980, seeking a fresh start after separating from her husband. A dedicated mother, Sue worked hard to provide for her children, 15-year-old John, 14-year-old Sheila, 13-year-old Tina, 10-year-old Rick, and 5-year-old Greg. The family had previously lived in Connecticut before relocating to Quincy, California, and eventually settling in Keddie. Despite financial struggles, friends and neighbors described Sue as resilient and warm-hearted. She made ends meet through odd jobs and was known to welcome her children's friends into their home. John, her oldest son, was protective of his siblings and mother, a responsible young man who enjoyed outdoor activities. Sheila was a typical teenage girl with dreams of her own future. Young Tina was described as sweet and creative, while the younger boys, Rick and Greg, were energetic children who made friends easily in their new community. Life in Keddie offered simple pleasures. The surrounding forests provided endless exploration opportunities for the children. The nearby Feather River cut through the canyon, its cold, clear waters teeming with fish. On weekends, the Sharp children would often play with others from neighboring cabins, forming the kinds of friendships that develop naturally in small communities. On Saturday, April 11, 1981, spring was beginning to transform the landscape around Keddie. Wildflowers dotted the forest floor, and the days were growing longer. For the Sharp family, it was an ordinary weekend. Sue had been looking for steadier employment, and the children were enjoying their school break. That evening, John invited his friend, 17-year-old Dana Wingate, to stay over. Dana lived in Quincy, a slightly larger town about 7 miles away, where most of the Keddie children attended school. The boys had become friends, both sharing an interest in the outdoors. That same day, Sheila had been invited to a sleepover at the Seabolt family's home in nearby cabin. As darkness fell over the Sierra Nevada mountains that Saturday evening, no one could have imagined the horror that would unfold in the quiet confines of cabin. Saturday, April 11th began like many others for the Sharp family. Sue woke early, as was her habit, to prepare breakfast for her children. The morning was crisp, with sunlight filtering through the pine trees surrounding cabin. The younger boys, Rick and Greg, were excited about watching Saturday morning cartoons, while Tina helped her mother with household chores. John had made plans with his friend Dana Wingate to hang out that day. Dana, a tall, athletic teenager with dark hair, arrived at the cabin around midday. The 2 boys spent part of the afternoon working on John's bicycle in the yard, their laughter occasionally drifting through the open windows of the cabin. Sheila, looking forward to her sleepover with the Seabolt family in cabin 27, packed an overnight bag with typical teenage care, selecting which clothes and personal items to bring. Sue reminded her to be back by Sunday afternoon to help with laundry, a regular weekend chore for the family. Throughout the day, neighbors reported seeing the Sharp family going about their normal routines. One neighbor recalled waving to Sue as she hung laundry on a line behind the cabin. Another remembered seeing John and Dana walking along the road that led toward the resort's main lodge. As evening approached, Sue prepared dinner for the family. Tina set the table while Rick and Greg argued playfully over a board game in the living room. The meal was simple, spaghetti with meat sauce, a family favorite that Sue could prepare economically for her large family and guests. After dinner, around 8 p.m., Sheila left for her sleepover at the Seabolt's cabin just down the path. She hugged her mother goodbye, completely unaware that this would be their final farewell. Miss Seabolt later recalled that Sheila arrived in good spirits, bringing a few records she wanted to play for her friend. Back at cabin 28, Sue settled in the living room with the younger children to watch television. John and Dana decided to walk to the resort's small general store about a quarter-mile away to buy sodas. The store's proprietor would later confirm that the boys had visited around 8:30 p.m., purchasing drinks and chatting briefly before heading back to the cabin. By 9:30 p.m., the younger boys, Rick and Greg, were put to bed in their room. Tina soon followed, retiring to the bedroom she shared with her mother. Sue remained in the living room with John and Dana, who were playing cards at the coffee table. A small television played in the background, a local station that would soon sign off for the night. as was common in rural areas in the early. The last confirmed sighting of any of the family members came around 10:00 p.m. when a neighbor walking his dog passed by cabin 28. He reported hearing the sound of laughter from inside, a normal, peaceful Saturday night scene that gave no indication of the horror that would unfold in the hours to come. Outside, the April night grew chilly. Typical of spring in the high Sierra Nevada, stars appeared in the clear mountain sky, visible between the towering pines that surrounded the cabin. The resort grew quiet as most residents retired for the evening. In cabin 27, Sheila and her friend eventually fell asleep after talking long into the night about school, boys, and their dreams for the future. What happened next in cabin 28 would remain one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in California criminal history. Sunday morning, April 12, 1981, dawned bright and clear over the Keddy Resort. Birds sang in the pines, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the dirt paths between the cabins. At approximately 7:45 a.m., 14-year-old Sheila Sharp left her friend's cabin to return home. She had promised her mother she would help with Sunday chores, and Sue was strict about responsibilities. As Sheila approached cabin 28, she noticed something unusual. The front door was partially open. This struck her as odd. Her mother always insisted on keeping doors locked at night. Calling out as she entered, Sheila received no response. The television was on, its volume low, broadcasting morning programming to an apparently empty room. What Sheila encountered next would forever change her life and haunt her dreams for decades to come. In the living room of cabin 28 lay 3 bodies: her mother Sue, her brother John, and his friend Dana Wingate. The scene was one of unimaginable violence. All 3 victims had been bound with electrical wire and medical tape. They had been stabbed repeatedly and showed signs of having been beaten with multiple weapons, including a hammer and a knife. Sheila's screams brought neighbors running. Among the first to arrive were the Seabolts, who had just watched the teenager leave their cabin moments before. Miss Seabolt immediately ordered everyone out of the cabin and ran to call the police from the resort's main office. Plumas County Sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes. The first officer on the scene, Steve Humphrey, would later describe it as the most horrific crime scene he had encountered in his career. Blood spatter analysis would eventually indicate that the victims had fought desperately for their lives. The extreme violence suggested rage rather than a calculated crime. As officers secured the scene, they made another discovery that added to the horror of the situation. In a separate bedroom, they found Rick and Greg Sharp, along with another boy named Justin Smart, who had been staying overnight. Remarkably, all 3 boys were alive and unharmed, apparently having slept through the brutal attack in the next room. Justin was the 12-year-old son of the Sharps' neighbors in cabin. The children were quickly removed from the scene and taken to a secure location where child welfare workers could attend to them. Meanwhile, as investigators began processing the crime scene, they realized something else disturbing. 13-year-old Tina Sharp was nowhere to be found. An immediate search of the resort grounds and surrounding forest yielded no sign of the missing girl. Her disappearance added another layer of mystery and urgency to the already complex investigation. Had she fled during the attack? Had she been abducted? These questions would haunt investigators for years to come. News of the murders spread quickly through the small community of Keddy, sending shockwaves of fear through the resort and surrounding towns. Most residents had left their doors unlocked, feeling safe in their remote mountain community. That sense of security was shattered in a single night. The Plumas County Sheriff's Department, ill-equipped to handle a crime of this magnitude, requested assistance from the California Department of Justice. Soon, forensic experts and additional detectives arrived to process the increasingly complex crime scene. Investigators determined that the murders had likely occurred between midnight and 2. The position of the bodies and evidence of struggle indicated that Sue Sharp had likely been attacked first, with John and Dana possibly coming to her defense. The murder weapons, believed to be a hammer, knife, and possibly other implements, were not found at the scene. The 3 young boys who had been asleep in the bedroom during the attack were interviewed carefully by specialists. 6-year-old Greg Sharp could provide little information, having slept soundly through the night. 10-year-old Rick Sharp recalled hearing muffled noises, but had assumed it was his mother watching television. It was Justin Smart, the neighbor's son, who provided the most intriguing and ultimately controversial testimony. Justin claimed to have awakened during the night and witnessed portions of the attack through a partially open bedroom door. He described seeing two men attacking Sue, John, and Dana. However, his account contained inconsistencies and details that changed over multiple tellings, leading some investigators to question its reliability. Child psychologists noted that the boy might have been incorporating details he overheard after the fact, or creating a narrative to cope with the trauma. As the investigation continued, the search for Tina Sharp intensified. Hundreds of volunteers combed the forests and canyons around Kettering. Divers searched the Feather River. Missing person bulletins were distributed throughout California and neighboring states. Yet despite these efforts, Tina remained missing. Days turned into weeks, with few leads. The community remained on edge, with many families choosing to leave the resort altogether. The once peaceful mountain retreat had become synonymous with unspeakable violence. In the weeks following the murders, the investigation expanded in multiple directions. Detectives interviewed dozens of Kettering residents and individuals from surrounding communities. They explored various potential motives, from robbery gone wrong to personal vendettas against the Sharp family. One of the first persons of interest was Martin Smart, the stepfather of Justin Smart, who had been staying in the Sharp cabin that night. Smart lived in cabin 26 with his wife Marilyn and Justin. During initial interviews, investigators noted inconsistencies in Smart's statements about his whereabouts on the night of the murders. Smart claimed to have been at home with his friend John Bobubi, a man with alleged connections to organized crime in Chicago who was staying with the Smart family at the time. Both men reported watching television and turning in around midnight. However, several witnesses reported seeing both men out later that evening, including at the resort's bar. Further raising suspicions, Marilyn Smart told investigators that her husband had been angry with Sue Sharp, believing Sue had been encouraging Marilyn to leave their troubled marriage. Additionally, Martin Smart reported a hammer missing from his tool collection around the time of the murders, a hammer that matched the type of weapon believed to have been used in the attack. Despite these suspicious circumstances, investigators lacked physical evidence directly linking Smart or Boubé to the crimes. Both men submitted to polygraph examinations with inconclusive results. Shortly after the murders, both Smart and Boubé left Kettering, with Smart and Marilyn divorcing soon afterward. Another avenue of investigation focused on known criminal elements in Plumas County. The early 1980s saw significant drug trafficking through the remote mountain regions of Northern California. Some theorized that Sue Sharp might have witnessed something she shouldn't have, or that her cabin was mistakenly targeted in a drug-related conflict. The investigation was hampered by several factors. The crime scene, while initially secured, had not been processed with the thoroughness that would be standard in later decades. Forensic techniques were more limited in 1981, with DNA analysis still years away from being a standard investigative tool. Additionally, the remote location and small local sheriff's department meant resources were stretched thin. As months passed with no arrests, the case began to cool. The Sharp family's surviving children were placed with relatives. Cabin 28 stood empty, becoming an eerie reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. Eventually, the resort's owners boarded it up, unable to rent it to new tenants as its reputation had become too notorious. The most heartbreaking aspect of the case remained the missing Tina Sharp. For 3 years, her fate remained unknown, leaving her siblings and extended family in agonizing limbo. Then, in April 1984, a breakthrough finally came. A forest worker discovered human remains near Camp 18, a remote area in Butte County, approximately 100 miles from Kettering. Through dental records, the remains were identified as those of Tina Sharp. The discovery provided some closure but raised more questions than it answered. How had Tina ended up so far from Kettering? Had she been transported alive? And why had her body been disposed of separately from the other victim? Medical examiners determined that Tina had likely been deceased for the full 3 years since her disappearance, suggesting she had been killed shortly after being taken from cabin 20. Due to the condition of the remains, the exact cause of death could not be determined. The discovery of Tina's remains briefly reinvigorated the investigation, but substantial new leads failed to materialize. By the mid-1980s, the case had officially gone cold, though it was never formally closed. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, various sheriffs and detectives would occasionally revisit the Kettering murders, reviewing old evidence and conducting new interviews. Several promising leads emerged, only to fizzle out upon closer examination. Meanwhile, the community of Keddie itself began to fade away. In 2004, in a development that struck many as symbolic, the new owners of the Keddie Resort demolished cabin. They cited the structure's deterioration as the reason, but locals knew the cabin's dark history had made it an unwanted reminder of the resort's tragic past. By then, most of the original cabins had been torn down, and the resort that had once been a vacation destination had essentially ceased to exist. For decades, the Keddie murders remained one of California's most notorious cold cases. The survivors of the Sharp family grew up carrying the weight of that tragic night. Sheila Sharp, who had discovered the bodies, spent years in therapy, dealing with the trauma of what she had witnessed. Rick and Greg Sharp were raised by relatives, growing up in the shadow of their family's tragedy. Then in 2013, more than 30 years after the murders, the case saw new life. A sheriff's detective named Mike Gamberg, who had lived in Plumas County during the time of the murders and had never forgotten the case, was assigned to revisit the investigation upon his return to the department after retirement. Gamberg approached the case with fresh eyes and the benefit of modern forensic techniques. He began by recovering all available physical evidence from storage and sending items for advanced DNA testing that hadn't been available in. He also tracked down and re-interviewed witnesses, many of whom had never been thoroughly questioned during the original investigation. One of Gamberg's most significant discoveries came from a simple piece of evidence that had been overlooked for decades. A hammer recovered from a pond near Keddie shortly after the murders had been deemed unrelated to the case and subsequently forgotten. Gamberg found documentation of this hammer and realized it matched the description of the one Martin Smart had reported missing. Even more tellingly, the pond where it was found was along the route Smart and Bubad would have taken when leaving town after the murders. Another breakthrough came when Gamberg interviewed Marilyn Smart's therapist, who revealed something startling. According to the therapist, Martin Smart had confessed to killing Sue Sharp, but denied killing the others. The therapist had reported this information to the original investigators, but for reasons unknown it had never been thoroughly followed up on. In 2016, a cadaver dog was brought to the site where Cabin 28 had stood. Despite the passage of 35 years and the demolition of the structure, the dog alerted to the presence of human remains near what would have been the cabin's back step. Subsequent excavation discovered a buried bloody knife that forensic experts believed could have been one of the murder weapons. Adding to these developments, a handwritten, anonymous letter was discovered in case files that had apparently been sent to the Plumas County Sheriff shortly after Tina Sharp's remains were found. The letter contained details about the disposal of Tina's body that only the killer would have known. Handwriting analysis suggested Martin Smart may have been the author. Unfortunately, both Martin Smart and John Bubad had died by this time. Bubad in the late 19th. This meant that even with mounting evidence pointing to their involvement, they could never be brought to justice. However, Detective Gamberg publicly stated his belief that the case had essentially been solved, with Smart and Bubad as the primary perpetrator. The motive, according to Gamberg's theory, aligned with early suspicions. Martin Smart had apparently blamed Sue Sharp for encouraging his wife Marilyn to leave him. In a jealous rage, possibly fueled by alcohol and drugs, Smart and Bubad had gone to Cabin 20. The situation escalated to violence, with John and Dana becoming collateral victims when they tried to defend Sue. Tina, the theory suggested, was taken from the cabin either because she witnessed the crimes, or as part of a previously harbored inappropriate interest Smart allegedly had in the young girl. The Keddie murders left an indelible mark on everyone connected to the case. For the surviving Sharp children, life would never return to normal. Sheila Sharp, who discovered the bodies that Sunday morning, has spoken publicly about her decades-long struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder. The images of what she found in Cabin 28 have never left her. Despite this burden, Sheila eventually married and had children of her own, demonstrating remarkable resilience. Rick and Greg Sharp were raised by relatives, growing up with the knowledge that their family had been torn apart by an act of senseless violence. Both boys, too young at the time to fully comprehend what had happened, would later learn the horrific details of that night in Keddie. Each found their own ways to cope with this legacy. The extended Sharp family never gave up hope for justice. They attended memorial services for Sue, John, and Tina, keeping their memories alive while waiting for answers that were painfully slow in coming. Family members maintained contact with investigators over the years, ensuring that the case would not be forgotten. For the community of Keddie, the murders marked the beginning of the end for the once charming resort. Tourism declined sharply after news of the crime spread. Visitors could not separate the beautiful mountain setting from the horrific events that had occurred there. Cabin rentals dropped off, and eventually the resort closed altogether. By the early 2000s, most of the original structures had been demolished, including cabin. The case profoundly affected law enforcement in Plumas County as well. Officers who responded to the scene that day carried those memories throughout their career. The sheriff's department faced criticism for aspects of the initial investigation, leading to changes in how major crimes were handled in the rural county. The case became a cautionary tale about the importance of properly securing and processing crime scenes, even in remote locations. The Keddie murders also entered popular culture, inspiring books, documentaries, and even horror films. Most notably, the 2008 film The Strangers drew elements from the Keddie case, though it fictionalized many details. In 2016, a documentary series titled Cabin 28: The Keddie Murders brought renewed attention to the case, coinciding with Detective Gamberg's reinvestigation. For decades, amateur sleuths and true crime enthusiasts have debated theories about what happened in Cabin. Internet forums dedicated to the case have thousands of posts analyzing every detail of the evidence. Some family members have expressed gratitude for this continued interest, hoping it might eventually lead to definitive answers, while others have found it painful to have their family tragedy become a subject of public fascination. In recent years, the property where Keddie Resort once stood has been redeveloped. New vacation homes now occupy the land, many of their owners unaware of the location's dark history. The forest has reclaimed parts of the old resort grounds, nature's way of healing a landscape marked by human tragedy. Yet for those who remember, the echoes of that April night in each spring, as wildflowers bloom in the meadows around where Cabin 28 once stood, locals still speak in hushed tones about the night that changed their mountain community forever. While Detective Gamberg's reinvestigation pointed strongly toward Martin Smart and John Boubet as the perpetrators, some questions about the Keddie murders remain unanswered. These lingering mysteries continue to haunt those connected to the case and intrigue those who study it. One persistent question involves the potential role of others in the crimes. Some investigators have suggested that Smart and Boubet may not have acted alone. The level of violence in the cabin, coupled with witness statements about multiple cars seen near Cabin 28 that night, has led to theories that additional perpetrators might have been involved. Another mystery concerns the boys who slept through the murder. How did Rick, Greg, and Justin remain unharmed, while such violence occurred just one room away? Some have theorized that the killers specifically avoided harming the children, perhaps because one of the perpetrators had a connection to Justin Smart. Others suggest that the attacks were executed with enough stealth initially that the boys simply didn't wake up until the violence had ended, and the killers then chose to leave them unharmed. The handling of Tina Sharp's remains presents another puzzle. Why was she taken from the cabin and transported approximately 100 miles away? If the motive for the murders was indeed Martin Smart's anger at Sue Sharp, why was Tina singled out in this way? Some investigators believe this supports the theory that Smart had an inappropriate interest in the young girl, while others suggest it might have been a calculated attempt to complicate the investigation. The role of local law enforcement in the initial investigation has also come under scrutiny. Some family members and journalists have raised questions about whether the original investigation was deliberately compromised. These theories suggest that connections between suspects and local officials might have influenced how thoroughly certain leads were pursued. While no concrete evidence supports these claims, the acknowledged missteps in the early investigation have fueled such speculation. Another theory that has emerged over the years involves potential connections to drug trafficking in the area. Plumas County's remote location made it attractive to marijuana growers and drug distributors in the early. Some have suggested that the Sharp family might have inadvertently become entangled in this underground economy, either by witnessing something they shouldn't have, or by being mistakenly targeted. What we do know with reasonable certainty is that the attack was not random. The level of violence suggests personal animus, particularly towards Sue Sharp. The fact that the perpetrators knew to target Cabin 28 specifically rather than any of the other nearly identical cabins in the resort indicates familiarity with the victims or their location. We also know that this was not a robbery gone wrong. Nothing of value was taken from the cabin, and the disorganized crime scene lacked the characteristics of a planned home invasion. Instead, the evidence points to a crime of passion violence fueled by anger, jealousy, or other intense emotion. DNA evidence analyzed during the reinvestigation revealed that blood found on a pillow in cabin 28 matched neither the victims nor any of the identified suspects. This suggests that at least one of the attackers was injured during the struggle, potentially by John or Dana as they fought to defend themselves and Sue. This unidentified DNA profile remains in databases, waiting for a potential match that could finally bring definitive answers. The story of the Ketty murders reminds us that behind every true crime case are real people whose lives were forever altered by violence. The Sharp family, Sue, John, Tina, Sheila, Rick, and Greg, were not characters in a mystery novel, but human beings with hopes, dreams, and futures that were either cut short or profoundly changed on that April night. The reinvestigation led by Detective Gamberg has provided some measure of closure to the surviving family members. While Martin Smart and John Boobity went to their graves without facing justice in a courtroom, the evidence uncovered decades after the crimes strongly suggests their culpability. For many connected to the case, this represents at least a partial answer to questions that haunted them for most of their lives. The passage of time has not diminished the impact of this case on those who survived it. Sheila Sharp, now in her 50s, has spoken about how discovering her family members' bodies shaped the course of her entire life. In interviews, she has described how everyday events can trigger memories of that morning. The sound of rain on a roof, the creak of a wooden floor, the particular quality of light filtering through pine trees. Yet she has also spoken about finding ways to honor her mother and siblings by living a full life despite the trauma she experienced. Rick and Greg Sharp have largely avoided public attention, choosing to process their family's tragedy privately. Friends report that both men have found ways to build lives that acknowledge their past without being defined by it, perhaps the most one can hope for after experiencing such profound loss at a young age. For the community around Ketty, the passage of years has brought physical changes, but not erasure of memory. Though the cabins are gone and these structures stand in their place, longtime residents still reference locations in relation to where the murders have become part of local folklore, stories told to newcomers to explain why older residents still lock their doors in this otherwise peaceful mountain community. True crime researchers continue to study the Ketty case for insights into investigative methods, the psychology of violence, and the impact of brutal crimes on small communities. The case serves as both a warning about the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of everyday life, and a testament to the enduring human desire for truth and justice, even when decades pass without answers. As our story comes to a close, the rain continues to fall gently outside your window. The mysteries of Ketty Cabin 28 may never be fully resolved to everyone's satisfaction. Some questions will likely remain unanswered, yet the effort to understand what happened that night, the dedicated work of investigators like Mike Gamb, the courage of survivors like Sheila Sharp in speaking about her experiences, and even the interest of those who learn about the case decades later, ensures that Sue, John, and Tina Sharp are not forgotten. Their lives mattered, their story mattered, and in remembering them, we honor all those whose lives have been touched by violence, and those who seek justice on their behalf. Story 4. Ray Rivera was born on June 10, 1973, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, before his family relocated to the United States. Those who knew Ray described him as intelligent, creative, and exceptionally kind. Standing at an impressive 6'5", he had a physical presence that matched his outsized personality and ambitions. After studying at the University of Florida, Ray pursued his creative passions, working as a writer, filmmaker, and financial journalist. His interests were varied and deep, from finance to filmmaking, from literature to screenwriting. Friends recall his enthusiasm when discussing projects and ideas, his eyes lighting up as he spoke about his latest creative endeavor. Ray was the kind of person who made you feel important, one friend later told reporters. When he talked to you, you had his complete attention. He remembered details about your life and always followed up on things you'd mentioned in previous conversations. In 2004, Ray married Allison, whom friends described as his perfect match. Their wedding in Puerto Rico was a joyful celebration, with photographs showing a beaming couple surrounded by loved ones. They settled in Baltimore, Maryland, buying a house in the Federal Hill neighborhood, and beginning what they hoped would be a long life together. Those who visited their home noted how it reflected their personalities: books everywhere, creative projects in various stages of completion, and a warmth that made guests feel instantly welcome. They had recently adopted a dog named Baxter, who quickly became an important part of their family. They seemed like they had it all figured out, one neighbor would later comment. Young, in love, building careers they were passionate about. They were the couple everyone wanted to be. Central to Ray's story is his longtime friendship with Porter Stansberry. The two had been close friends since high school, maintaining their connection through college and into their professional lives. Their bond was strong enough that when Porter established his financial publishing company, Stansberry Research, in Baltimore, he eventually convinced Ray to relocate there. In late 2004, Ray accepted Porter's offer to work for his company as a writer and videographer. Ray and Allison moved from Southern California to Baltimore, buying their historic house in Federal Hill, just a short drive from the Stansberry Research offices. Ray's role at the company involved producing video content about financial topics and writing for their publications. While not primarily a financial expert himself, Ray was a skilled communicator who could translate complex investment concepts into compelling content for their audience. The move to Baltimore represented not just a career opportunity, but a chance to work alongside his best friend. Porter was already established in the financial publishing world, and his company was growing rapidly. For Ray, this appeared to be a perfect next step, combining his creative skills with stable employment, provided by someone he trusted implicitly. Friends observed that Ray seemed to flourish in Baltimore initially. He enjoyed the historic character of the city, was excited about renovating their new home, and spoke enthusiastically about the work he was doing. He and Allison were planning for their future, discussing starting a family, and integrating themselves into their new community. Porter and Ray's relationship appeared by all accounts to be as strong as ever. They spent time together both professionally and socially, with Porter even designating Ray as the family's emergency contact, a sign of the deep trust between them. In the months leading up to May 2006, subtle changes began to appear in Ray's behavior, according to those closest to it. While still the warm, engaging person everyone knew, Allison later recalled that he seemed increasingly anxious about certain aspects of his life. Ray had transitioned away from full-time work at Stansberry Research and was pursuing freelance opportunities while working on a screenplay. This creative project was important to him, a mystery screenplay that he worked on diligently. Writing had always been one of his passions, and the opportunity to focus on this creative endeavor seemed to energize him. However, Allison also noted some unusual behavior. Ray had begun to express concerns about their home security, checking the locks multiple times and seeming unusually vigilant. When asked about these concerns, he would downplay them, saying he was just being cautious. Given that they lived in an urban area, these precautions didn't initially seem excessive to those around him. During this period, Ray and Allison were also preparing for her parents' upcoming visit and planning a trip to New Mexico, where they would celebrate their upcoming wedding anniversary. They had dinner reservations, plans for sightseeing, and were looking forward to this special time together. These future plans would later stand in stark contrast to theories that Ray might have been contemplating ending his life. In April and early May of 2006, Ray continued his freelance work and screenplay writing. He maintained his regular routines, walking their dog, meeting with friends, discussing future projects. On Mother's Day 2006, just days before his disappearance, Ray called his mother and had a normal, cheerful conversation, making plans to see her soon. There was absolutely nothing in that call that raised any red flags, his mother would later tell investigators. He was talking about the future, about projects he was excited about Allison and their plans together. On Monday, May 15, 2006, Ray spent the day working from home, while Allison was out of town on business. According to phone records, he made several routine calls and worked on his computer throughout the day. Friends who spoke with him described these conversations as perfectly normal. There were no goodbye messages, no unusual statements, nothing to suggest what would unfold over the next. As the evening of May 15 turned into the morning of May 16, there was no indication that this ordinary Monday would be Ray Rivera's last day at home, or that it would mark the beginning of one of Baltimore's most perplexing mysteries. As you continue to relax to the sound of gentle rainfall, let's explore what happened on that fateful day in May, when Ray Rivera disappeared. Tuesday, May 16, 2006. began as an ordinary day in the Rivera household. Allison was away on a business trip to Richmond, Virginia, having left the previous day. Ray was home in their Federal Hill residence, continuing his freelance work and screenplay writing. Their dog Baxter kept him company as he moved through his normal routine. Phone records would later show that Ray made several routine calls in the morning hours, checking in with contacts about freelance projects, touching base with friends. Nothing in these conversations indicated distress or unusual behavior. He even made plans to meet with someone the following day to discuss a potential work opportunity. The weather in Baltimore that day was mild and partly cloudy, an unremarkable spring day in Maryland. Neighbors who saw Ray walking Baxter that morning described his demeanor as normal. He waved hello, exchanged pleasantries about the weather, and continued on his way. These ordinary interactions would later take on poignant significance as the last normal moments of Ray's life. Around midday, Ray spoke with Allison by phone. Their conversation was routine, discussing her business trip, making plans for when she returned, and talking about her parents' upcoming visits. She later recalled nothing unusual in his voice or their discussion. They ended the call as they always did, with expressions of love and plans to talk again later. This ordinary Tuesday was about to take an extraordinary turn. At approximately 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday evening, Ray received a phone call on the family's home line. Allison would later learn about this call from their home alarm system, which recorded when the call came in, but not the content of the conversation or who it was from. What is known is that immediately after this call, Ray's behavior changed dramatically. He told Baxter he would be right back, rushed out of the house, and drove away in his car. He left behind his personal effects, not even taking his wallet. The precipitous nature of his departure suggested extreme urgency. When Allison called home later that evening and received no answer, she wasn't immediately concerned. She assumed Ray might be walking Baxter or had stepped out briefly. When she still couldn't reach him the following morning, her concern grew. She called neighbors who agreed to check on the house. What they found was disturbing. The house was empty except for Baxter, who had been left without food or water, something completely out of character for the devoted pet owner. Ray's car was gone, but his wallet remained behind. Most concerning, he hadn't called Allison to explain his absence, something he would never normally fail to do. Alarmed, Allison cut her business trip short and rushed back to Baltimore. Upon arriving home on Wednesday, she immediately contacted the police to report Ray missing. She also reached out to their circle of friends, including Porter Stansberry, to organize a search. The response was immediate and substantial. Porter reportedly offered company resources to help find Ray, including hiring a private investigator and offering a $1,000 reward for information. Flyers with Ray's photograph appeared throughout Baltimore. Friends and colleagues formed search parties, combing areas where Ray might have gone. Days passed with no sign of Ray. His car, a 2001 Mitsubishi Montero, was found parked in a lot near the Belvedere Hotel, an elegant Beaux Arts building from 1903 that had been converted to condominiums and offices, while still maintaining an events venue called the 30. The car contained no clues about Ray's whereabouts or why he might have gone to this location, which was about a 5-minute drive from his home. The discovery of the car shifted the search to the areas surrounding the Belvedere, but initially yielded no result. As one day turned into several, hope began to diminish, and the mystery only deepened. On Thursday, May 25, 2006, 8 days after Ray's disappearance, an employee of the Belvedere was walking through a little-used conference room called the Hell's Annex, which sat adjacent to the main building. Looking up at the lower roof of the adjacent structure, he noticed something disturbing, a hole in the metal roof, as if something had crashed through it. Police were called to investigate, and what they discovered sent shockwaves through the search effort and the city of Baltimore. Ray Rivera's body was found in an unoccupied office space beneath a hole in the roof. He was wearing flip-flops, shorts, and a shirt, casual attire consistent with someone who had left home expecting to return quickly. The medical examiner determined that Ray had suffered injuries consistent with a fall from a great height. The location of his body in relation to the hole in the roof suggested he had fallen or jumped from the top of the Belvedere, crashing through the metal roof of the annex in the process. This discovery transformed a missing persons case into something far more perplexing. How and why had Ray Rivera ended up on the roof of the historic Belvedere Hotel? Why would he have gone there in such a hurry? And most importantly, what had happened on that roof to result in his fatal fall? The Baltimore Police Department formally classified the death as unexplained, a designation that acknowledged the unusual circumstances while leaving open multiple possibilities: suicide, accident, or something else entirely. For Allison Rivera and those who knew Ray best, the notion of suicide seemed inconceivable. He had no history of mental illness, was making plans for the future, and had given no indication of suicidal thoughts to anyone. The circumstances of his disappearance, rushing out after a phone call, seemed more consistent with responding to an emergency than planning to end his life. As investigators began to piece together Ray's final movements and the circumstances surrounding his death, the case would only grow more bizarre, with the discovery of a cryptic note that would become one of the most discussed elements of the entire mystery. In the days following the discovery of Ray's body, Allison was sorting through his belongings when she made a startling find. Behind their computer, tucked away as if hidden, was a folded note taped to the desk. The content of this note would become one of the most discussed and analyzed aspects of the entire case. The note began with a statement asking that it not be opened except by those I love and trust. What followed was a typed document containing what can only be described as a stream of consciousness writing, references to Freemasonry, films directed by Stanley Kubrick, a list of people Ray knew and admired, and various phrases that appeared to be drawn from a Masonic oath. The note was formatted strangely, with some portions typed in tiny font sizes. It included seemingly random phrases like "whom virtue unites," "death will not separate," and references to the gang. Many sections read like a gratitude list, naming friends, family members, and personal heroes who had positively impacted Ray's life. Perhaps most puzzling was that the note was signed "Who I Am" as the following: "I am Rayo Rivera," as if he were introducing himself to an unknown reader. It was dated and appeared to have been created just days before his disappearance. When investigators analyzed the note, opinions were divided. Some viewed it as evidence of a declining mental state, potentially supporting the theory of suicide. Others saw it as a creative exercise related to Ray's screenwriting, noting that many of the films referenced shared themes of secret societies or hidden realities. It read more like a creative person working through ideas than someone planning to harm themselves, noted one friend who had worked with Ray on writing projects. His mind just worked differently, making connections between things that weren't obvious to everyone else. Allison insisted that while the note was unusual, nothing about it suggested suicidal intentions. In fact, she pointed out that much of it expressed gratitude for life and the people in it. She believed it might have been related to a writing project or perhaps inspired by Ray's interest in filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, whose work was prominently referenced. The note has been analyzed by amateur sleuths and professional investigators alike, with some suggesting it might be a code or contain hidden messages. Others have proposed it could have been written under duress, or while experiencing a brief psychotic episode. To this day, the true meaning and purpose of the note remains unknown. As investigators reconstructed the likely scenario of Ray's death, they faced a perplexing physical problem. If Ray had indeed fallen from the roof of the Belvedere, the trajectory required to reach the point where he crashed through the annex roof seemed nearly impossible. The hole in the metal roof was located approximately 45 feet horizontally from the edge of the main Belvedere roof. For Ray to have landed at this spot, he would have needed to take a running start and make an extraordinary leap, a distance that many experts deemed physically improbable, if not impossible, for even a trained athlete. Frank Gaffney, a former police officer who worked security at the Belvedere, told reporters, "I don't believe that he could have fallen from the main roof and hit that spot. The distance is too great. You'd have to take a running jump, and even then, I'm not sure it's physically possible to clear that distance." This physical impossibility led some investigators to consider alternative scenarios. Perhaps Ray had fallen or jumped from a lower point, such as a ledge or balcony on the side of the building. However, an exhaustive review of the building's architecture failed to identify any such point that aligned with the location of the hole. Others suggested that perhaps Ray had been dropped from a helicopter or thrown from the roof by others. However, no witnesses reported seeing a helicopter in the area that night, and the medical examiner found no evidence of a struggle or injuries inconsistent with a fall. The police investigated whether Ray could have accessed the roof legally. The door to the roof was normally locked, with access restricted to maintenance personnel. No security cameras covered the roof access points, leaving a critical gap in understanding how Ray might have reached the roof in the first place. Adding to the mystery was the condition of Ray's phone and glasses, which were found on the roof of the Belvedere and appeared undamaged, strange considering the devastating impact that had damaged the roof and caused fatal injury. His money clip, however, was never recovered despite extensive searches. These physical inconsistencies created a profound puzzle. The evidence clearly showed that Ray had somehow fallen through the roof of the annex, but the physics of how he reached that point remained inexplicable. This fundamental contradiction would fuel speculation and alternative theories for years to come. The Baltimore Police Department faced the challenging task of making sense of Ray Rivera's death despite its many contradictions. After several months of investigation, the medical examiner officially ruled the manner of death as undetermined rather than accident, suicide, or homicide. This unusual classification acknowledged that there wasn't enough evidence to conclusively support any single theory. Detective Michael Byer, who led the investigation, later expressed frustration at being unable to provide clear answers to Allison and the Rivera family. In most cases, the evidence points clearly in one direction, Byer would later say in an interview. With Ray Rivera, every answer we found just led to more questions. The police investigation focused on several key elements: the phone call that prompted Ray's hasty departure from home, his movements between leaving his house and arriving at the Belvedere, and how he accessed the roof. Despite interviewing numerous potential witnesses and reviewing available security footage, they were unable to establish a complete timeline of Ray's final hours. One particularly frustrating dead end involved the phone call that appeared to have triggered Ray's departure. Police traced the call to the switchboard at Stansbury Research, but couldn't determine which specific extension had placed the call or who had made it. Multiple employees were interviewed, but no one admitted to making the call or knowing its content. The official investigation also examined Ray's mental state, interviewing friends, family members, and colleagues. While they found evidence of some increased anxiety in the weeks before his death, particularly related to home security, there was no history of mental illness, no previous suicide attempts, and no farewell messages or other typical indicators of suicidal intention. By late 2006, the active investigation had largely stalled due to lack of new evidence. The case remained open but inactive, a status that would remain unchanged for years. One of the most unusual aspects of the case emerged after Ray's death, when journalists and investigators attempted to speak with employees at Stansbury Research. According to multiple sources, including reporters who covered the story, the company instructed employees not to speak about Ray or his death. This directive was particularly striking given that Porter Stansbury and Ray had been close friends since high school. Porter had initially helped organize search efforts and offered a reward for information, but following the discovery of Ray's body, he reportedly did not speak publicly about the case and declined interview requests from both media and investigators. The Baltimore Sun reported that when they attempted to interview Stansbury employees, they were referred to a company spokesman who stated that a directive had been issued not to comment on the matter. This apparent reluctance to cooperate fully with the investigation raised questions among both investigators and Ray's family. Some journalists speculated that the company's silence might have been related to legal concerns. In the year prior to Ray's death, Stansbury Research, then called Agora Financial, had been charged by the Securities and Exchange Commission with defrauding subscribers through false stock information. The company had been fined $1.5 million. Ray had not been implicated in these legal issues, and it remained unclear whether there was any connection between the SEC case and his death. However, the company's apparent unwillingness to assist fully in the investigation created an additional layer of mystery and speculation. Allison Rivera would later express disappointment that Porter, once so close to Ray, seemed to distance himself after the tragedy. This shift in behavior from such a longtime friend added to the painful confusion surrounding Ray's death. As the official investigation stalled, alternative theories emerged from various sources: private investigators hired by the family, journalists covering the case, and eventually internet sleuths who became fascinated by the mysterious circumstance. One theory proposed that Ray might have witnessed something he wasn't meant to see or learned information that put him in danger. His background in financial journalism, combined with his work for a company that had faced SEC charges, led some to speculate that he might have discovered financial improprieties that made him a target. Supporters of this theory pointed to Ray's apparent concern about home security in the weeks before his death, and the mysterious phone call that prompted his final journey. They suggested that perhaps he had been lured to the Belvedere and met with foul play, with his body being staged to suggest a suicide. Another theory focused on the Freemason references in Ray's note. While Ray was not known to be a Freemason himself, some of the language in his note appeared to reference Masonic oaths and rituals. This led to speculation about whether he might have been involved with the organization or investigating it for a writing project. The Freemason theory gained traction among some internet commentators who noted that the Belvedere itself had historical connections to Freemasonry, having been built by a prominent Mason in the early 90s. However, no concrete evidence emerged to suggest Ray had any actual involvement with the organization beyond his apparent interest in it. A third theory suggested that Ray might have experienced a brief psychotic episode, a sudden break from reality that led him to the roof of the Belvedere. Mental health experts noted that such episodes can sometimes occur without prior history, particularly in men in their 30s. The unusual note, combined with reported anxiety about home security, was cited as potential evidence for this theory. However, those closest to Ray consistently rejected this explanation, emphasizing his clear-headed nature and lack of any signs of serious mental distress. His final phone conversations on the day of his disappearance had been completely normal, and he had been actively making plans for the coming days and weeks. In the years following Ray's death, Allison Rivera refused to accept that she might never know what truly happened to her husband. She continued to advocate for further investigation, working with private investigators and eventually bringing the case to wider attention through media coverage. "I knew Ray better than anyone," she told a Baltimore reporter on the 5th anniversary of his death. "The idea that he would commit suicide makes absolutely no sense. Something happened that night, and I won't stop until I know what it was." Allison carefully preserved Ray's note and other personal effects, believing they might eventually provide clues if reviewed by the right experts. She compiled a detailed timeline of his last known movements, and kept records of all witness statements and investigative findings. Her persistence led to periodic reviews of the case by law enforcement, though these reviews largely reaffirmed the original undetermined classification, rather than providing new insights. Nevertheless, she continued to pursue every possible avenue for information. Perhaps most difficult for Allison was navigating her relationship with Porter Stansberry, and others who had been close to both her and Ray. The apparent reluctance of some former friends to discuss the case created painful divisions at a time when she most needed support. "The hardest part isn't just losing Ray," she confided to a close friend. "It's feeling like some people who supposedly cared about him don't seem interested in finding out what really happened." Despite these challenges, Allison rebuilt her life while keeping Ray's memory and the search for truth alive. She eventually relocated from Baltimore but maintained connections with those still working to solve the case. Ray's case received renewed attention in July 2020, when it was featured in the first episode of Netflix's reboot of Unsolved Mystery. The episode, titled "Mystery on the Rooftop," introduced the puzzling circumstances of Ray's death to a global audience, and generated significant public interest. Following the Netflix coverage, online forums and social media groups dedicated to the case proliferated. Amateur sleuths analyzed every detail, from the contents of Ray's note to the architecture of the Belvedere, offering theories ranging from the plausible to the highly speculative. This renewed attention brought both benefits and challenges. On one hand, it generated new tips and perspectives that investigators could consider. The Baltimore Police Department reported receiving numerous calls after the episode aired, though they did not publicly disclose whether any provided substantial new leads. On the other hand, the proliferation of theories online sometimes veered into territory that was painful for Ray's family and friends. Speculation about his mental state, his marriage, or his character often seemed to lose sight of the real person at the center of the case. Journalists who had covered the story from the beginning noted how the case exemplified both the best and worst aspects of public involvement in unsolved mystery. The collective effort to find answers demonstrated how deeply people could care about a stranger's fate, while the more sensationalistic elements showed how easily facts could be distorted in the pursuit of an engaging narrative. Through it all, those who had known Ray personally continued to emphasize that the public discussion often missed the most important aspect of the case: the remarkable person who had been lost. They described his kindness, his creativity, his sense of humor, and the many ways he had touched their lives. Now, nearly 20 years after Ray Rivera's death, many fundamental questions remain unanswered. Who called Ray from the Stansberry offices on the evening of May 16, 2006? And what was said in that conversation that prompted him to leave his house so urgently? How did Ray access the roof of the Belvedere, and was he alone when he did so? Given the physical improbability of the jump, how did his body end up where it was found? What was the true purpose and meaning of the cryptic note found taped behind his computer? Why did some of those closest to Ray appear reluctant to cooperate fully with the investigation into his death? These questions continue to haunt both investigators and those who care about finding the truth. The passage of time has made answers increasingly difficult to find. As memories fade, witnesses move away or pass on, and physical evidence deteriorates. Yet the case remains officially open, and the possibility remains that new information could emerge. Advances in forensic technology, a witness finally deciding to come forward, or the discovery of previously overlooked evidence could still provide the breakthrough that has eluded investigators for so long. While the circumstances of Ray Rivera's death have become the subject of endless speculation and discussion, those who knew him best have worked to ensure that his life is not defined solely by its mysterious end. They speak of a man whose warmth, intelligence, and creativity touched many lives during his 32 years. Friends recall his infectious enthusiasm for creative projects, his ability to connect deeply with others, and his loyalty as a friend and partner. Former colleagues describe his professionalism and innovative thinking. Family members cherish memories of holiday gatherings, inside jokes, and the unconditional love he offered. Ray had this ability to make you feel like you were the most important person in the room. One childhood friend shared at a memorial service. He wasn't just listening to respond, he was listening to understand. That's incredibly rare. His passion for writing and filmmaking produced a body of work that survives him. Articles, scripts, and video productions that showcase his talents and perspective. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you not just the mystery of this case, but the reminder that even in the darkest stories, there are elements of human resilience and the enduring search for truth. Story 5. This is the story of Dorothy Valancourt, a mother, a woman, and a mystery that has lingered for more than 5 decades. It's a story of loss, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of answers. And as you listen, you'll find yourself asking the same question her daughter has asked all her life. What happened on that cold December morning in 1966? Dorothy Valancourt's story began thousands of miles away from San Francisco, in a remote corner of Tasmania. She was born into a family of modest means, the youngest of 3 siblings, and her early years were shaped by the isolation and natural beauty of the island. The Valancourts lived in a small wooden house surrounded by dense forests, where the sound of the ocean crashing against rocky cliffs was a constant backdrop to her childhood. Dorothy's father, a stern but hard-working man, was a fisherman, while her mother tended to the home, her hands always busy with sewing or baking. Even as a child, Dorothy displayed a quiet resilience, a sense of determination that would come to define her later years. She was an observant girl, often sitting by the window with a book or watching the world outside with a thoughtful expression. Her teachers described her as intelligent, though unassuming, someone who preferred the shadows of a room over its spotlight. But her quiet demeanor belied a strong inner drive. Dorothy longed to see the world beyond Tasmania, to escape the confines of her small community and make something of herself. When World War II broke out, Dorothy found her opportunity. Barely in her 20s, she joined the nursing corps, determined to contribute to the war effort. It was during these years that she truly came into her own. The war took her far from home, placing her in the chaos of field hospitals and makeshift clinics, where she tended to wounded soldiers and civilians. Those who worked alongside her spoke of her unshakable calm under pressure, and her ability to offer comfort even in the darkest moment. It was here, amidst the horrors of war, that Dorothy developed a sense of purpose and an unwavering compassion for those in need. After the war ended, Dorothy, like so many others, found herself adrift. Returning to Tasmania no longer felt like an option. The island that had once seemed like home now felt suffocating, a place she had outgrown. And so, with little more than a suitcase and the savings she had managed to scrape together, Dorothy boarded a ship, bound for America. It was a bold move for a woman of her time, and one that spoke to her courage and ambition. She landed in San Francisco in the early 1950s, a city bustling with energy and promise. Life in San Francisco, however, was not the fresh start Dorothy had envisioned. The post-war boom brought with it opportunities, but also challenges, especially for a single woman trying to establish herself in a new country. Dorothy worked long hours as a nurse, often taking on shifts at understaffed hospitals to make ends meet. Her days were exhausting, her nights often spent in a small, sparsely furnished apartment. She eventually met and married Robert, a mechanic who shared her tenacity but little else. Their relationship was rocky from the start, a union forged more out of necessity than love. The marriage brought Penelope into Dorothy's life, a bright and curious child who quickly became her mother's world. But the happiness Penelope brought was overshadowed by the cracks in Dorothy's marriage. Robert's temper and unpredictability created a turbulent home life, and the strain of juggling work, marriage, and motherhood began to take its toll on Dorothy. By the time Penelope was 7, Dorothy had made the difficult decision to leave Robert, seeking a quieter, more stable environment for herself and her daughter. But single parenthood came with its own challenges. Financial instability became a constant worry. Dorothy often worked at double shifts, leaving little time to spend with Penelope. When she wasn't working, Dorothy struggled with feelings of loneliness and inadequacy, feelings she kept hidden from everyone, including her daughter. Alcohol became a coping mechanism, a way to dull the edges of her reality. Yet, despite these struggles, Dorothy remained fiercely protective of Penelope, determined to give her daughter the life she herself had always longed for. Penelope, for her part, adored her mother. She looked up to Dorothy with a mix of admiration and concern, sensing even at a young age that her mother was fighting battles she couldn't fully understand. Dorothy would often read to Penelope before bed, her soft voice filling their small apartment with stories of faraway places and brave heroines. Those moments, however brief, were a refuge for both of them, a reminder of their bond amidst the chaos of their lives. In the years leading up to her disappearance, Dorothy's struggles became more pronounced. Financial difficulties forced her to move frequently, and her once steady nursing career became sporadic due to health issues. Yet, even in these difficult times, Dorothy maintained a sense of dignity. She never let on to Penelope just how hard things had become, shielding her daughter from the full weight of their circumstances. To Penelope, her mother was a pillar of strength, someone who faced life's challenges head-on, no matter how daunting. And then one day, Dorothy was gone. Her disappearance left a void that Penelope would carry with her for the rest of her life. The apartment felt emptier without her, the silence more oppressive. Penelope clung to the memories of her mother's laughter, her stories, and the way she would kiss her forehead before tucking her in at nights. But as the days turned into weeks, those memories began to feel like fragments of a dream, pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together. Dorothy's disappearance began like so many tragedies, quietly, without warning, in the kind of ordinary circumstances that make it even harder to comprehend. On the morning of December 12th, 1966, she left her San Francisco apartment. It was just another cold, gray day in the city, the type that doesn't promise anything extraordinary. Dorothy, dressed simply in a coat and carrying her handbag, stepped out into the brisk air. She wasn't going to work. She wasn't meeting anyone as far as anyone knew. It was just a routine departure, so much so that no one paid any attention. Her first known stop was a small coffee shop near the apartments. The server later recalled her ordering a single cup of black coffee, sitting at the counter for several minutes. She seemed distracted, staring out of the window. What was she thinking about in those moments? Did she already know she wouldn't return, or were those minutes just like any other day to her? From there, Dorothy's path grew hazy, like a trail that grows fainter with every step. Witnesses place her near a fire station in the downtown area sometime in the late morning. She appeared to be walking alone, her coat tightly pulled around her to ward off the chill. The fire station employees didn't report anything unusual. She wasn't seen entering the building, nor did she speak to anyone there. She simply passed by, a fleeting figure on an otherwise uneventful day. This was the last confirmed sighting of Dorothy Valancourt. After that, she vanished as though the earth itself had swallowed her whole. When Penelope returned home later that day, she found the apartment eerily empty. It wasn't unusual for her mother to be out, but as the hours stretched into the evening, a gnawing unease began to take hold. Dorothy always left a note if she planned to be out late, always called if something delayed her. But there was no note, no call, just a haunting silence. By the second day, Penelope's anxiety turned to action. She contacted neighbors, asking if anyone had seen her mother. They hadn't. The days wore on, and with each one, Dorothy's absence became more inexplicable. Penelope eventually called the police, filing a missing persons report. Officers arrived to inspect the apartments, finding little to suggest foul play. Dorothy's personal belongings were still in place. Her clothes, her toiletries, even the small jar of coins she kept by the kitchen counter. The only thing missing was Dorothy herself. What made the situation even stranger was the lack of any trail to follow. There were no receipts, no sightings at bus or train stations, no phone calls to friends or family. It was as though Dorothy had walked into the morning air and dissolved into it. In the days immediately following Dorothy's disappearance, Penelope's life became consumed by the search for her mother. For a teenager still trying to navigate her own place in the world, the task was monumental. She started small, reaching out to neighbors, visiting nearby parks, and asking shopkeepers if they'd seen her mother. Most were sympathetic, offering words of comfort and vague promises to keep an eye out. But sympathy wasn't enough. It didn't bring her closer to answers, nor did it dull the growing sense of fear that had taken root in her heart. As weeks passed with no leads, Penelope turned to the police, but the investigation quickly stalled. Dorothy's case was considered low priority, dismissed as the likely disappearance of a struggling single mother. Perhaps voluntary, perhaps not. Penelope felt the weight of their indifference like a crushing blow. She knew her mother wouldn't have walked away from her life, from her daughter, without a word. But proving that to those in authority was a battle Penelope wasn't prepared for, though she fought it anyway. Over the years, Penelope grew relentless in her pursuit. She wrote letters to state officials, pleading for resources to be devoted to her mother's case. She reached out to private investigators, though her limited funds meant these efforts were sporadic at best. And when advances in forensic science began making headlines in the late 20th century, Penelope found herself with renewed hope. DNA testing had begun revolutionizing the identification of cold case remains, and Penelope believed it might offer a chance to find her mother, even decades after her disappearance. By the early 2000s, Penelope reached out to organizations specializing in cold cases, including retired detectives who had taken on independent investigations. Their support brought fresh eyes to Dorothy's case, though progress remained slow. The key problem wasn't a lack of effort, it was a lack of evidence. Dorothy had left behind no trails, and even the fire station sighting couldn't confirm her movements. It was as though she had been erased from existence, leaving only memories behind. Then came the breakthrough, a moment Penelope had both longed for and dreaded. In 2022, 56 years after Dorothy's disappearance, forensic teams uncovered human remains in a remote area of the San Francisco Hill. The discovery was almost accidental, the result of a survey unrelated to missing persons. When investigators analyzed the bones, they realized they belonged to an individual who had been buried there for decades. Penelope was notified shortly after the findings were made public, and she submitted her DNA to see if there was a match. The waiting period was agonizing. Penelope felt torn between wanting answers and fearing what those answers might bring. When the results confirmed that the remains belonged to her mother, Dorothy Valancourt, Penelope experienced a bittersweet wave of emotions. On the one hand, she finally knew where her mother had gone. On the other, she was no closer to understanding why or how Dorothy had ended up buried in the hills far from her life in San Francisco. The items found with Dorothy's remains only added to the mystery. The red cotton dress and off-white trench coat, so distinctly separate from the clothes she had been wearing the day she disappeared, became symbols of the story's unanswered questions. For Penelope, the dress represented everything about her mother's case that felt unknowable. It didn't fit Dorothy's style, nor did anyone recall her owning such a garment. Was it hers? Had it been given to her by someone else? And if so, why had it been left there? The cause of Dorothy's death also remained elusive. The forensic analysis revealed no clear signs of trauma, no fractures, no bullet wounds, no evidence of blunt force. Her skeletal remains told no stories, offered no clues. Yet her burial location suggested she hadn't died naturally. The isolated area, coupled with the presence of the dress and coat, pointed to the possibility of human involvement, though who might have been involved remained a mystery. One theory raised during the investigation involved a romantic partner. Dorothy's life had been marked by moments of loneliness, and there were whispers of a man she had been seeing sporadically in the months before her disappearance. Some believed he might have been connected to her fate, though the lack of tangible evidence meant the theory remained speculative. Penelope herself felt torn about this possibility. She didn't recognize the idea of her mother being swept away by someone who would harm her. But the truth was, she didn't know much about Dorothy's relationships during that time. For Penelope, the discovery of her mother's remains provided both closure and a new chapter of uncertainty. The search had ended, but the questions persisted, each one gnawing at the edges of her understanding. What had happened in those final moments? Was Dorothy's death the result of malice, or was it a tragic accident, compounded by years of misunderstanding? And above all, who, if anyone, knew the full story? Decades later, Penelope still reflects on the unanswered questions surrounding her mother's case. For her, the truth isn't just about understanding what happened to Dorothy. It's about honoring the life that was cut short and finding peace in the face of the unknown. And while the red dress remains a haunting symbol, it also serves as a reminder of Penelope's resilience, a testament to her unwavering pursuit of answers, even in the face of silence. As Penelope stood in the hills where her mother had been found, she felt a stillness settle over her, a sense of finality she had both craved and feared. The rolling landscape was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. This was where Dorothy's journey had ended, in a place so far removed from the life she'd known. For Penelope, it was a moment of reckoning. After decades of wondering, searching, and imagining countless scenarios, she finally had a tangible answer, though not the full truth. Her mother was gone, but she had been found, and in that there was at least some measure of peace. For years, Penelope had lived with the weight of not knowing. Every time the phone rang unexpectedly or a stranger crossed her path, she wondered if it might lead her closer to Dorothy. The uncertainty had shaped every aspect of her life, from her relationships to her career, always pulling her back to the same unanswered questions. And now, standing in the very place where her mother's remains had been uncovered, Penelope felt that weight begin to lift, even if only slightly. The search was over. The mystery, however, remained. She found herself reflecting on the woman her mother had been, not just the mother who tucked her in at night, but the individual with dreams, flaws, and an inner world Penelope would never fully know. Dorothy had been a survivor of war, a woman who rebuilt her life against the odds, and a mother who carried more burdens than she ever let on. Her disappearance had stolen her story away, leaving Penelope to piece it together through memories and fragments. And now, even with Dorothy's physical presence confirmed, Penelope knew there would always be parts of her mother's story that remained just out of reach. There was a bittersweetness to the answers Penelope had found. The discovery of Dorothy's remains provided closure, but it also opened a new chapter of questions. Why had her mother ended up in the hills? What was the significance of the red dress? And perhaps most hauntingly, had Dorothy been alone in her final moments, or had someone else played a role in her fate? These questions lingered like echoes, reminding Penelope that some mysteries may never be fully solved. Yet for the first time in decades, she felt a sense of resolution. Her mother had been lost, but she was no longer missing. Reflecting on the journey, Penelope couldn't help but think about the years of progress that had made this moment possible. Advances in forensic science, particularly DNA testing, had given her the answers she had sought for so long. The technology that identified her mother's remains didn't exist when Dorothy first disappeared. It was a reminder of how far society had come, and of the lives that could now be honored and remembered because of these breakthroughs. For Penelope, the discovery wasn't just about her mother. It was about all the families still searching for their loved ones. Families who might one day find the same closure she had. And then there was her own perseverance. For over 50 years, Penelope had refused to let go of her mother's story, even when the trail had gone cold and the world around her seemed to move on. Her determination had carried her through countless dead ends, moments of despair, and the quiet loneliness of knowing that no one else would fight for Dorothy the way she could. Looking back, Penelope realized that her resilience wasn't just about finding her mother, it was about honoring her. Dorothy had faced so many challenges in her life, and Penelope wanted to ensure that her story, however incomplete, wouldn't be forgotten. As Penelope shared her story with the world, she hoped it might inspire others to keep searching, to keep asking questions, and to never give up on the people they love. She understood the pain of not knowing, the ache of absence, and the quiet hope that one day the answers might come. Her journey was a testament to the power of persistence, the importance of remembering those who are lost, and the remarkable progress that can be achieved when science and humanity come together. For viewers of this story, Dorothy Valancourt's case is a poignant reminder of how fragile life can be and how mysteries, even the most elusive ones, can eventually yield their secret. It is a story of a mother's disappearance, a daughter's unwavering love, and the quiet triumph of finding truth in the face of uncertainty. Penelope's story challenges us to ask ourselves, how far would we go for the answers we seek? And what would we do with those answers once we found them? Now, in reflecting on the journey to uncover Dorothy's fates, several lessons come to light. First and foremost is the importance of perseverance. Penelope's determination was the driving force behind keeping Dorothy's memory alive and pushing the case forward, even when hope seemed distant. Her refusal to accept silence or closure without answers is a powerful example of the lengths to which love and dedication can take us. Equally important is the role of forensic science. The breakthroughs that identified Dorothy's remains highlight how technology has revolutionized our ability to solve cold cases. DNA testing, in particular, has given countless families the opportunity to find answers, bringing closure where there was once only uncertainty. Dorothy's case serves as a reminder of the impact that scientific advancements can have, not just on individual families, but on society as a whole. Finally, there is the value of storytelling. By sharing Dorothy's story, Penelope ensured that her mother's life and legacy would not be forgotten. It is through stories like these that we remember the people behind the mysteries, their struggles, their triumphs, and the ways they continue to touch the lives of those who loved them. Our background sounds will carry you into tranquility as you drift towards sleep. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story. Rest peacefully, knowing that another story awaits you next time, ready to accompany you on another journey toward restorative sleep. But if you're still awake, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next true crime story. And until next time, stay safe and take care. Good night.